Hello once again, everybody. Thank you for joining me here on this Wednesday, November 25th edition of ATS Radio. I'm your host, Adam Burke. I'll be chatting today with professional bettor and handicapper Kyle Hunter from huntersportspicks.com. We will attempt to navigate week 13 here in college football and attempt to do the same thing on the college basketball side. We are recording this on Monday afternoon for the Wednesday show, so some of these games may have been canceled. Some of them will probably have line moves. Just want to throw that out here at the top of today's show, but want to make sure we got some information out to you. We'll do the same thing in college football that we always do: regression stats, box score notes, talk about some games, stuff like that. Then on the college hoops side, we'll tell you which stats matter the most when it comes to handicapping. We'll talk about some tempo things, some coaching changes, some general knowledge stuff for college basketball, because frankly, we don't know which games will get played on Wednesday and how many games will actually get played here over the course of the next few weeks in college hoops. But whatever gets played, college football, NFL, college basketball, you'll be able to read about it over at ats.io. My updated college football power ratings posted over there, some sportsbook promotions that you want to check out, and of course, links to download the ATS app, which you can find in the Google Play Store, in the Apple Store, or if you head over to ats.io, click on the download links, it will take you to the corresponding place, either in the Google Play Store or in the Apple Store, to download that ATS app. It's a bet tracker. It's got an odds screen, stats, trends, information, ATS standings, points scored per game, points against per game, some advanced analytics in there as well. And of course, article integration from ats.io. Very powerful tool to have at your fingertips, to say the least. With that, we bring on professional bettor and handicapper Kyle Hunter from huntersportspicks.com. And Kyle, how's it going today, man?
You know, I'm still feeling a little down from the weekend here in football. I had a really rough weekend, had all kinds of line moves in my favor, and it didn't matter. You know, those are really discouraging because, you know, you get 4 or 5 games that move in your favor by 4 or 5 points and you lose all of them. And that's pretty hard to take, but it is kind of, this year is so much different. I feel like there's a lot more variance this year than there has been any of the other seasons. And I don't like to give excuses. You know, I feel like I should be performing better than I am right now. At the same time, there are definitely more unknowns than what there usually are.
Well, and you and I were talking before we started recording here. You know, I said as much on my Monday show that I'm going to tread very, very lightly here as we go forward. But you know, these teams that haven't played in a little bit of a period of time because of COVID, or these teams that have known COVID outbreaks, it feels like there have been pretty significant adjustments to their power ratings. And I talked about this on Monday. I have overlays on Miami of Ohio against Akron, a big one on Southern Miss and UAB, had one on Western Kentucky and Charlotte before that game got canceled. So we don't know. Nobody knows on this side of the counter or on the other side of the counter how to price COVID, whether it's cases active on a team or a team coming off of cases, a team trying to scramble to find enough players to play, stuff like that. It's just everywhere you turn, there's just some other variable in college football this year that, you know, is very hard to account for. And to be honest with you, I'm not having a good college football season. You know, you mentioned you've had some tough weekends here. A lot of people I talk to kind of struggling on the college football side. I think it just kind of comes with the territory this year with all of the uncertainty on top of, you know, trying to handicap the natural variance of the sport.
Yeah, definitely. And it's been a rough one to try to figure out what to do with. You know, I need to keep making plays. I've had my volume be a little bit lower than normal. I think that will continue to be the case in college football and college basketball, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But you know, it's hard to know how to price any of these things. Like you said, I'm going to shy away from sides even more than I do totals. I think sides are really hard. Trying to pick an ATS winner based on, you know, it's just it's all a big unknown. And I feel like this far into the season, we should know usually. And this year we don't really know. I still think that if I continue to get that many that move in my favor as far as closing line value, I will improve here. And, you know, I've also had I'm down in college football. I've had a really bad NFL season. So disappointing season thus far. And I have to say too, I'm as we're sitting here talking, I'm reading some of the tweets here about Joe Burrow, and I'm getting even more discouraged as I read those.
Yeah, not a pretty picture for Joe Burrow yesterday. And look, I can tell you one thing. A lot of us cannot wait for January 1st, 2021, when that clock strikes midnight, we can finally put this hellacious year behind us, which it's been a tough year in so many ways for so many people. And I know that, we're talking about it from a betting standpoint. Now, granted, your livelihood's tied to it, and so is mine as a content creator. So, we can kind of lament what's happening here. Obviously, there are much larger things at play in a lot of other areas of the world. But, man, it's just the thing of it is, and I talked about this with Brad Powers on last week's show, and I'm sure we'll talk about it again as we go forward here. Like, there's nothing I can take from this season either. Like, usually you look back at a season and you say, okay, maybe I didn't account for this enough. Maybe I need to adapt in, this certain way, something like that. I feel like it's a complete throwaway. I feel like there's nothing that I can really take from this year. And another thing that Brad mentioned last week, and something we'll continue to talk about going forward too, I mean, what this has done from a recruiting standpoint, not having high school football in a lot of states, not having a lot of JUCO action in a lot of states, that, throws some wrinkles into the preparation for next season too. So, again, for us, like I said, I mean, there are obviously much larger things at play for a lot of people and a lot of other, industries. But for us, I mean, we're sort of walking blind into next season in some degree too.
I agree with that. And I think that's a really good point you just brought up. At the end of every week, I try to go back and look and see, I grade my handicap of that particular play. And this year, it's really hard to grade those. I mean, it's really hard to say whether that was a good play, bad result, or whether it was something different. At the end of this season, I have a feeling I'm going to be saying, at this point, we're this far into the season, and I'm definitely disappointed with my results. At the same time, I can't really point to, okay, I've done this wrong. I've done this and that wrong, and this is what I'm going to do different. I don't know that I've really done anything that I need to change. Obviously, like I said, I'm going to be careful on how many sides I play, but, it's hard to take too much from this year. And like you said, when we start next year, it's going to be like, okay, so we take what we got last year, being this season, and pretty much discount it, because I think, both of us want to be optimistic. I think next year is going to be a lot better than this year. So I don't want to sound pessimistic about next year, but, I feel like 2 years ago is going to be more normal to, or more like what next year will be. So this year, like you said, is kind of be a throwaway year. And I think that won't be the case just in college football. It will be the case in a lot of sports.
Well, and again, I mean, the tough thing is, look, like a lot of times I go off of the previous year's power ratings as kind of a base to start the next season. Well, I don't think Florida State will be 88th in my power ratings, going into week 1 next year. I don't think South Carolina will be 78th. I don't think Michigan State will be 79th. I don't think that Minnesota is going to be 64th, so there's also that too, where some of these teams have just had things just dramatically snowball on them this year, just out of control. So can't even really take that away. But the one thing I will tell you, and this, and it's easier said than done, but all you can do is control getting the best of the number. And you've done that a lot, and you've got closing line value. And yeah, you can't pay your mortgage with closing line value. You can't put food on the table for your kids with closing line value. But we know that is an indicator of long-term success, getting out, beating the market, getting the best of the number that you can, not settling for the closing number, stuff like that. And you've been able to do that. So, that, philosophically, or at least what you're doing in practice is still working. It's just the results aren't coming. And whether it's, COVID, whether it's just, the inherent difficulties of handicapping collegiate athletes, whatever it is. I mean, you're controlling what you can control. And it's hard to sell that to clients and other people that, follow along with the plays and stuff like that. But, it's all you can do, man. Whether it's a COVID year or not, all you can do is put yourself in the best position to make money and, have to hope that that's good enough.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that, going forward, if I continue to get that CLV, I think things are going to improve. And my long-term track record has been really good. I still expect things to get better. I just like to be totally transparent and say all of my thoughts on here. That's why I try to be different. I know that Brad Powers is the same way. Blessing is a very transparent guy as well. You don't have guys on this radio show that are going to be misleading, but I know that some other people try to say things like, well, I had a great play on this, and then they had 3 other losers and they don't say anything about those. I don't want to be that guy. I never want to be that guy. So, I'm disappointed with my results so far. I still think the process is good. And I know that some people have said that they've still been able to benefit from some of the free information and the regression stuff. And I've heard from several people that are really looking forward to our college basketball information. So looking forward to keeping going here with giving out a lot of information that can help people.
We will be doing some of that college basketball stuff here shortly, but I guess the last thing I'll say is that I've noticed that myself and my guests, I mean, that this show can kind of be almost therapeutic. We have our platform, we get up on our soapboxes and rant and riff and go on, and hey, it helps. And I think to some degree too, it makes us more relatable to the listeners who, I'm sure that they've all at some point in time gone through the same things that we're going through. And in fact, maybe they're going through them along with us here, which of course we're sorry for that if it's been, because of the information that we've given out. But, hey, I mean, look, we talk about this all the time. This is not a get rich quick scheme unless you hit one of those, $900,000 parlays that all the major mainstream media outlets talk about. This is a long-term business. And again, all you can control is, being prepared, being organized, getting the best of the number, and hoping that, of course, it winds up working out in your favor. And there are other ways to go about this. If you're having a bad year, maybe you turn to live betting, finding good opportunities in game that kind of, offset some of your losses, or you attack player prop markets or something like that. We try to make this show as approachable as we can for all of the listeners, from the absolute novices to the people that maybe use this more as a supplement. So, we're kind of focusing on the bigger picture more often than not, but there are opportunities from a live standpoint, player props, derivative markets, all those kinds of things that can help you, for the full game market. But it is hard for us to go onto such a micro level here on the show with the time that we have. We keep things generally kind of more on a macro level. So, hopefully people have kind of taken some of the things we've talked about and applied them to, different disciplines here in this business. But look, let's just go ahead and talk about some of the box score and regression stuff and try to find some long-term things that should really help us. And really something right at the top for both of us here is that I know Cincinnati won 36-33, and that would imply that the game was close. If you look at the box score, that game was not very close. Cincinnati was dominant defensively in that one.
Yeah, UCF got out to a lead to start with, and then Cincinnati took the lead. I know UCF scored and got the 2-point conversion, and everybody saw the end of the game, how Cincinnati intentionally didn't score. And I know that affected the point spread. So if you had Cincinnati, that was a bad beat, certainly. Also, Cincinnati, 11 penalties, UCF only 5. The AAC is notorious for these widespread penalty issues. It could be one team or it could be another, but there's going to be a lot of flags. It might look about like the Packers Colts game did yesterday for a while, but Cincinnati 6.0 yards per play, 4.3 for UCF. Cincinnati now goes to play Temple. One of my correct plays from last weekend was East Carolina, and I'll be honest, that was one I was really scared to make. Probably about my least favorite play last week, and that ended up winning. Temple is they are in big trouble. I don't know what to think of Cincinnati laying that kind of number, but UCF also not in a great spot, but playing against a USF team that doesn't have much to play for now. But really Cincinnati, I think the big takeaway here is Cincinnati is definitely the real deal.
Yeah, Cincinnati, a couple real short field goals there, one from the 26, one from the 22. As you mentioned, they had that intentional, whatever you want to call it, at the end of the game there. So they were right there knocking on the door to go ahead and score again. They fumbled a punt return that I believe UCF scored on. So Cincinnati left some points on the field, made some mistakes, still won the game, and looked really good defensively in the process. UCF ran 84 plays in the 23 minutes that they had the ball. So still a lot of tempo for them, just very inefficient offensively. We'll see if they pick that up here this week. As you mentioned, laying a monster number in Tampa, 25. Now the number for that game against South Florida, a game that was ugly. Look, just about every Big Ten game this season has been pretty damn ugly. Northwestern and Wisconsin, 17-7 Northwestern. I don't know if they were the right side in that game or not, but that's a game where, that set offense back to like before we had the forward pass.
Yeah, I leaned under in that one and I passed because I thought, 44 is awfully low. Obviously it wasn't low enough, But Wisconsin 4.5 yards per play there, Northwestern 3.9. Wisconsin had 8 penalties, Northwestern had 1. Northwestern also +4 turnover margin. Look, I really like Pat Fitzgerald. I would say, as a Buckeyes fan, I think Northwestern's probably my second favorite team in the Big Ten, just as a fan, because I really like Fitzgerald quite a bit. And the thing is Northwestern is really not great either. They're a good team. We haven't seen that offense that was supposed to be so much better. Look, I think everybody thinks Ramsey is an upgrade at quarterback, but the offense still isn't very good. I know Wisconsin's defense is very good, but Northwestern's still not very good on offense. But that Northwestern defense is very good. It's just they're a team that I think you want to be careful laying too many points with them.
No, I absolutely agree. And something we found out, I think, this past weekend here is the Big Ten's not good.
Right.
It is not a good conference. Ohio State is clearly a flawed team. I know both you and I dropped the Buckeyes in our power ratings. I dropped them 3 points. You dropped them 2.5. The uncharacteristic Fields turnovers were certainly a big issue in that game, but also the pass coverage for Ohio State was bad. You and I have talked about this a ton, whether it's on the show or in texts back and forth. Master Teague ain't it. I mean, the dude's a battering ram, and he's a very good short yardage back, and he's very hard to tackle. And I know he had pretty good rushing numbers against Indiana, but that dude doesn't have a second gear, man. I mean, he's like towing an anchor behind him. And maybe it's just because we're spoiled with Dobbins, but Ohio State's a flawed team too. And in fact, I've got them, clearly, if they get to the college football playoff, clearly a dog now against both Clemson and Alabama. So they should get there. Maybe that was their scare. Maybe that'll kind of wake them up a little bit. But the Big Ten sucks, buddy.
They really do, because it feels like even the teams in the Big Ten who look pretty good right now, like Northwestern, are pretty flawed also. Some of the teams from the middle. I think Wisconsin's a good team. Mertz is an upgrade at quarterback. Those turnovers were the issue the other day. Wisconsin is going to be pretty solid. We know Michigan's been terrible. Penn State has been terrible. Michigan State is on another level awful. And I mean, gosh, all these teams in the middle in the Big Ten that usually are pretty decent, they're really bad now. Minnesota also. Purdue should have won that game the other day. They got ripped off, certainly. So the Big Ten is a very flawed conference, and I definitely agree with you about Master Teague. He's a huge downgrade. While you talk about from Ezekiel Elliott, Dobbins, even Mike Weber. Mike Weber was a lot better than Master Teague is. So Ohio State is clearly a good team, but it was there for them to cover against Indiana. They're up 35-7 and then 42-21. And then the pass defense just gives up too much. So I will say that I think you and I both agree that Indiana is not a great team either. So I think that I would want to warn people to be cautious about upgrading Indiana too much from that.
No, I agree. And also for Ohio State, I mean, how the hell do you not have a better kicker? You're Ohio State, for God's sake. You should have the best kicker in the country every year. I mean, whatever. Anyway, one game that we were on, one game that we were not on, because I didn't actually get Oklahoma State at 9.5. It went to 7, and I was like, okay, well, I think that's probably kind of most of the line value out of that one. And Kansas State. And, I was telling you this before the show. I think I texted this to you as well. And I've talked about this before, that sometimes it's the line move that doesn't happen that says the most. And you've got Iowa State and Kansas State. Iowa State laying double digits in a game with a fairly low scoring expectation. Two teams that are much better in the underdog role. And I'm sitting there, I'm happy as a clam, man. I got Kansas State plus 11. I'm thinking, all right, cool. This is going to close like 9.5, something like that. Maybe the spread will come into play. Maybe it won't. But I'll be comfortable with my position. I'm watching. I'm waiting. I'm looking at the board. Why isn't this moving? Why isn't this moving? Why isn't this moving? Saturday, it hasn't moved yet. And I go, Iowa State's going to win by 30. And in fact, they won by 45? So again, sometimes when you watch and you're expecting a line move and it doesn't come, that's just a deflating feeling. And I knew that bet was dead from the jump. And it turns out that Oklahoma and Iowa State both won very, very comfortably last weekend.
Yeah, and I'll start with the Oklahoma State and Oklahoma game. Oklahoma State has several injuries on the offensive line, and they can't run the football like they have in the past. It also seems like Lincoln Riley has figured out Mike Gundy. I mean, Mike Gundy can't do anything right against Oklahoma. Oklahoma has had some guys come back that weren't there at the beginning of the season, and I think that's making a difference for them. I think they're clearly a better team than they were a few weeks ago. Oklahoma State seems to be going in a different direction. I know Spencer Sanders is playing with a bit of an injury, and then they bring in Illingworth, and I think he was like 5 for 21 passing. I mean, it was really, really bad. Fortunately, I didn't bet that one. I will give props to one of our listeners, a listener of the show who is an Oklahoma fan, sent me a message and said, I'd be careful about taking Oklahoma State here because Oklahoma has really had their number and Oklahoma is getting a lot healthier. I wrote him back after the game and gave him some props on that one because I was leaning Oklahoma State there. This is one where I think that Oklahoma State's a tough team to bet here in the next few weeks. Oklahoma's a team that I'd rather bet on than against at this point, but laying a lot of points with Oklahoma has not been a winning proposition in the Big 12. So not sure what to do with them. As far as Iowa State, Kansas State, I'm not sure whether to say I'm a total dumbass for taking Kansas State or if I should just say, if you look at it on paper, so let's put Team A versus Team B, and let's give a total of 46.5 and plus 11. And what the two sides had stats wise, you're going to win 55% or more of your bets. And it's a proven very good angle to take a big underdog with a low total. So from that standpoint, I don't think that, we did anything wrong. On the other hand, Kansas State had a lot of COVID issues. I know there were several guys that sat out, some guys transferring from the program. So they missed several guys on Saturday. We didn't know that when we were talking about it last week. Kansas State looked absolutely hapless. I think that's probably the worst bet I've made all year. I think Iowa State probably could have won, 60 something to nothing. At the end of the game, Iowa State was just taking it easy on them. So, Kansas State, I don't know what to do with them going forward, but I do know I don't want to bet on them right now. It seems like they were kind of a smoke and mirrors team. At the same time, do you really want to bet against Kansas State a lot? Because Kleiman has made a lot of money for people. I believe ATS wise, since he's been at Kansas State, they've covered at least 70% of their games.
Yeah, and I think he's like 10-4 now or something like that as an underdog. So not to be last weekend, I guess, but that happens. Again, it's just comes with the territory. And like I said, I mean, once I saw that line never moved, and maybe it was the COVID thing. I didn't really realize that. And that's another thing too. Like, you don't know about these COVID things until after you lock in a bet or right before the game, or Boise State's been notorious for that this year, where you don't know who's playing until they actually, kick off. And then it's like, oh yeah, so these guys aren't playing. It's like, I mean, come on, man. Like, help us out here a little bit. Standardized injury reports in college football would be great, but in the age of COVID, probably wouldn't be happening anyway. You had a couple of MAC notes that you wanted to mention here as far as some box score things.
Yeah, real quick before we go on, it looks like Kansas State has had over 80 players test positive for the year overall.
Over 80?
It says as of last week, I guess it was 78. And last weekend, there were about 14 or 15 guys that missed a game. So that certainly didn't help. And, we'll have cases like that. And obviously sometimes it'll work in your favor, but it's disappointing when things like that happen because you wish you knew more about it. But MAC notes, got to talk about the MAC a little bit. Western Michigan, 628 yards, 8.4 yards per play last week against Central Michigan. Central Michigan should be one of the best defenses in the MAC. And I know that's not saying a lot. I mean, it's the MAC. Nobody plays very good defense. But Western Michigan so far this year, in 3 games, 8.15 yards per play. That's number 1 in the country. Now, I realize that they've ran it up on some bad teams too, but Eskridge is a major problem. That guy is a really good player, and he's definitely an NFL player.
Yeah, Western Michigan in that game, and I mentioned this on Monday's show, Caleb Ellaby, the quarterback, had 12 completions for 382 yards, and 5 of them went for touchdowns. 5 of his 12 completions went for touchdowns, 32 yards per catch, 31.8 actually, for Western Michigan. I mean, you want to talk about chunk plays. That'll do it. Speaking of chunk plays, Kent State had a lot in the battle for the wagon wheel against my alma mater.
Yeah, 750 yards and 9.6 yards per play.
Don't bury the lead, 69 points.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And I think that might be why they stopped, because I think they could have
Oh, I
scored
hope
right at the
so.
end of the game. They could have had 76, but I mean, why get 76?
Right.
But I think Kent State actually might be pretty decent. I mean, I had to upgrade them quite a bit. I think I upgraded them 4.5 or 5 points. I upgraded them 4.5 points in my power ratings. Kent State, I think, is a good team. They're well coached. Their defense is still an issue, and they'll give up a lot of points this year, but I think they're going to score a lot on a lot of teams in the MAC. Kent State's a team I'd rather bet on than against right now.
I bumped them up 4, and I'm still low on this Buffalo number, so I clearly didn't go up enough. And this is a Kent State team, too, that, I mean, they were very good in the second half of last year, got to a bowl game, covered a bunch of numbers in the process. And so far this year, they've proven to be pretty reliable, too. So looks like I got to bump them again here. I've got 11.5 on that game against Buffalo, and it was trending up a little bit on Monday morning, and then just an A-bomb of money came in on Buffalo, and it's on Kent State, excuse me. It was 7.5 on Monday here as we're recording. Obviously, check and see what the line looks like now on Wednesday, but some very influential people out there did like Kent State on Monday morning. So it looks like I'm going to have to make an adjustment to the Golden Flashes here as we go forward. Couple more real quick, because I want to make sure we get to the college basketball stuff and also get to chat a few games. You and I both highlighted this one. LSU and Arkansas. This box score, I don't know if I've ever seen one like this. So LSU wins 28-24. They ran 38 more plays than Arkansas, 91-53 in the play department. Arkansas outgained LSU, running 38 fewer plays. The problem was Arkansas 0 for 10 on third down, LSU 12 for 23.
Yeah, LSU won 27-24, so it was a point off of that. But I remember that because Arkansas had a chance to kick the field goal that would have put it in overtime, and I think it was like 40 some yards away, and it came up about 10 yards short. I mean, I know it was raining, but I thought that was pretty surprising. You barely get it into the end zone when it's from 40 some yards away. Because I had the over in that game, and I'm watching the end of it, and I say, okay, if it's long enough, it looks like it's good. And then it's like, wow, I wasn't expecting that. But LSU 27-24, Arkansas 8.4 yards per play, LSU 4.6 yards per play, but Arkansas loses 0 for 10, like you said, and then 12 for 23 on third down. Arkansas had some real big chunk plays, obviously. I mean, that's the only way they even stayed in. That's why the yards per play is what it is and why the game was close. But Arkansas couldn't get it on third down. They were a bit cautious on some of their fourth down chances where maybe they could have gone for it. I don't think LSU is very good right now, and I think Arkansas is a little bit better than what this score would look. So I think Arkansas is a team that I'd rather bet on than against.
Well, of course, Arkansas moved into a favorite role against Missouri very early in the week here. And this is why box score study is important on Sundays, because you will see line moves based on this stuff. Arkansas had 9 yards per play against Florida the week before. Now, they gave up 63 points, but they had 9 yards per play the week before. So this Arkansas offense is legit, and the defense, could very well be legitimately bad. So, I'm a little bit surprised that total hasn't gone up, but Missouri, another one of those teams with a lot of COVID issues. I know what Kendall Briles is attached to. I know what's in his past, having been there at Baylor, but with the way that both the NFL and college football are trending towards offense, somebody's hiring this dude as a head coach here, and I don't think it's that far off.
Yeah, I agree. Like you said, there's some baggage there, but somebody's going to hire him, and I mean, he'll probably do pretty good, to be honest. Like you said, the way it's going toward offense, really good offensive mind. And Arkansas, look, they didn't exactly have a great offense to work with from the beginning of this year. And I know Franks came over to Arkansas, but I don't think anybody thinks that Franks is a great player. And the people around him are not very good. So I think Arkansas has really been pretty good on offense compared to what you would kind of expect.
Now, I drove this point home on Monday, but I want to talk about it here real quickly, and then we're going to get into some regression teams. Arizona and Washington. This game in particular is one of the reasons why we drive home this box score study point. And of course, both Kyle and I do it to update our power ratings, but there's a lot of additional value, even if you don't do power ratings. As I said, you can get out in front of some line moves. Arizona and Washington. In the first 3 quarters of that game, Arizona ran 33 plays for 46 yards. 33 plays, 46 yards. On their last 4 drives, Arizona 32 plays, 301 yards. So once Washington stopped caring, it was a 37-0 game at that point. Then Arizona moved the football. Washington thought they had the Apple Cup on deck. Winds up that they don't. That game's been canceled. But Arizona did nothing when the game mattered. Put a bunch of garbage time stats up. So remember that for Arizona, that when the other team's defense cares, their offense is not good at all.
Absolutely. I think that's an amazing one. It's when you sent me that one, actually, I read it and I was like, holy shit. I didn't realize it was that, excessive. I did know that they were way ahead, but 46 yards on 33 plays, that's almost unheard of. And then all once they put up a bunch of points, I think my takeaways from that, number one, I'd be careful betting Arizona. I don't trust that coaching staff. I don't like them. Washington, I think, is an under team. If you look at Washington, they're 124th in the nation in tempo so far, using more than 30.5 seconds between plays. I think that Washington is a good defense. I don't think their offense is very good. So I think Washington is a dead nuts under team.
Yeah, I think so too. I think you isolated that pretty early on in the process too. You talk about how they want to run the football and play defense there with their defensive coordinator Jimmy Lake. By the way, Arizona and UCLA here. That number 9.5. I couldn't lay a big number with UCLA, but I certainly wouldn't discourage people from not taking UCLA after that great offensive performance from Arizona. And yeah, I don't think Kevin Sumlin is long in Tucson. That seems to be a pretty big takeaway here. All right, so some regression stats. Why don't you go ahead and run through the 4 that you've got, and then I'll kick the extra. Well, it's not an extra point, but you get the idea. I'll talk about the one that I want to mention here.
Yeah, Northern Illinois, 7 trips into the red zone so far this year, 7 touchdowns. Now, this is a really bad offense, and it's been fortunate in the early going. So I think Northern Illinois is a team I'd rather fade here going forward, because teams in the MAC are going to score a lot of points. And Northern Illinois, thought of as a good defense, they're maybe better than some defenses in the MAC, but they're not really a good defense. I think Northern Illinois is going to struggle to keep up against those teams that score a lot of points. So to me, Northern Illinois team I'd rather fade, maybe take an under with if it's high enough, because I don't think Northern Illinois is going to keep up in some of those really high scoring games. So that's my takeaway from them. Do you want me to just run through all these right away?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Nevada, 22 trips in the red zone, 9 touchdowns, really good passing attack. I still think Carson Strong is a good quarterback for this. The field gets tighter in the red zone. They don't have, I don't think they'll have a great touchdown percentage in the red zone, but it's going to be better than 9 out of 22. This is a good offense. Nevada's going to score a lot of points against a lot of these teams that they play. So I think Nevada's a team I'd rather either bet on or bet overs with. Tulane has 15 fumbles and has only lost 4 of them so far this year. So some really good fumble luck for them. I'm going to save the best for last here. Florida Atlantic's defense, major regression signs. When I saw this one, I highlighted this one really quickly. Opponents have 11 trips into the red zone so far this year. 1 touchdown out of 11 trips into the red zone. 5 field goals too, and 5 turnovers for the opposition. They're 8th in yards per play allowed, 2nd in points per game allowed. Look, they have a really good defensive coordinator. Everybody knows that. And I think this is a Florida Atlantic defense that is much better than it's been in the past. But we have to say, playing the likes of Western Kentucky in a tropical storm, UMass in heavy wind, hell, UMass in any condition. I mean, that's going to make a defense look really good. But this is a good defense, but it's not near as good as it looks right now. So Florida Atlantic is a team that I'd be careful betting those under 45, under 46 games that they're going to have, because I think Florida Atlantic on offense, not great, but they're not terrible either. I think they can run the ball. They switch quarterbacks and they've had a little bit more success with their backup quarterback. And Florida Atlantic's defense is a good defense, but they're going to play some teams that can score on them here. So I think Florida Atlantic regression in a big way coming on defense.
I think that's an excellent one. And they played Middle Tennessee State this week. Big win for Middle Tennessee last week, beating Troy. MTSU 16 of 21 scoring touchdowns in conference games here this season in the red zone. So maybe this is the week that does regress a little bit for Florida Atlantic. Again, recording on Monday afternoon, and Florida Atlantic 6.5-point favorite against Middle Tennessee here. The one that I want to go back to, because we talked about this one last week, and I said we don't have a chance to fade them because they're playing Abilene Christian. But my hope is that they play up to expectation, win by about 40, as they did. I think there's a chance to go against this team going forward. That is the Virginia Cavaliers. In conference games, in their 7 games against the ACC, 5.21 yards per play. In their 7 ACC games, 6.44 yards against per play. So they've been outgained by 1.23 yards per play in conference. Of course, it turns out they play Florida State this week, who I pretty much cannot bet on, even if I was given free money to do it. But Virginia is a big regression candidate for me. I'm going to be kicking myself in the ass if Florida State does play well against them this week. I don't think I can take it unless it gets, quite a bit higher here. But I will say that there is a little bit of money on Florida State here at the outset. So I think somebody else paying attention to this yards per play differential for Virginia.
Yeah, I can't take Florida State. Even at 10, I can't take Florida State. So it's dropped below that number right now as we're talking. I do think, though, when I look at the schedule going forward for Virginia then hosts Boston College. That could be a good play on Boston College. And then also Virginia at Virginia Tech also could be a good play on Virginia Tech. So let's talk about Virginia again in these coming weeks.
That sounds good to me. I got a trivia question for you here. So Northern Illinois, right? You said they're 7 for 7 on touchdowns in the red zone. Who's the other team in the country that's 100% on touchdowns in the red zone?
Have they played many games?
No, they've played 3.
Okay.
I could give
Buffalo?
you 126 guesses, and I don't think you get this.
Okay, my guess was Buffalo, but
it's UMass. They're one for one. They have one trip into the red zone in 3 games, but they did score a touchdown.
That was a trick question.
That was a trick question.
I'm throwing a flag on that one.
Boise State third, by the way, 15 of 16. Western Michigan 12 for 13. Eastern Michigan 11 for 12. So directional Michigan schools doing pretty well when they get to the red zone. But yes, UMass 1 for 1. It's the only time they'll ever lead the country in anything offensively. So credit to them for that. All right, so we got some games to break down here. And as I said, again, we are recording this on Monday afternoon, so some of these numbers may have moved, and this one probably will, because this is an extremely high-profile game Friday afternoon. Notre Dame and North Carolina, 4.5 and 66. The numbers here as we're talking on Monday afternoon, with Notre Dame a favorite in Chapel Hill. And I think the big takeaway for this one is, Kyle, I imagine a lot of people are going to go, how is Notre Dame only favored by that much? And that will be the talking point, the narrative on every mainstream show, this and that, so on and so forth. But people are going to ask, how can this line only be 4.5? Notre Dame's number 2 in the country and whatever else. Look, North Carolina's defense ain't great, but damn, is that offense good.
Yeah, it is. And if you look at yards per play margin, North Carolina 7th in the country, plus 2.01 yards per play. Notre Dame's plus 1.47. I haven't looked at their strength of schedule. I assume Notre Dame's played a tougher schedule, but Notre Dame to me is a very good team. I don't think they're an elite team. Notre Dame's a good team, certainly. Their defense is good. Their offense has improved here of late. The thing about North Carolina is North Carolina has kind of not played as good as I thought they would play so far in the season. So I think it's dangerous to say Notre Dame is only laying this many points. It's free money, that type of thing. Also, when you hear that narrative, your antenna have to go up and you have to get a little bit worried. Notre Dame's 7th in the country in third down conversion percentage offense, 54.05%. I think that's likely to regress a bit. Notre Dame also 5th and third down conversion percentage defense, 25.96. So Notre Dame's been really fortunate from that standpoint. Notre Dame has a big edge special teams wise, according to S&P here, 37th against 110. I think North Carolina is going to score a lot of points in this game, and I tend to lean toward the over. My number in this one was 66, and they didn't put out anything much lower than that. It was 65. Now it's 66 as we're talking. So I would lean to the over here. I don't think I'm going to have a play in this game. I think if I had to bet something here, I would probably take North Carolina later in the week, because I assume here later in the week, I think you're going to be able to get a line better than what we're talking about right now.
Interestingly enough, and I know Sagarin's kind of bastardized and skewed this year with, conference only schedules and this and that, but North Carolina's strength of schedule 63rd, Notre Dame 66th. So that's kind of interesting with the fact that Notre Dame, played Clemson earlier on in the year. So, I think that's a pretty interesting thing there that, their strength of schedule isn't higher having played a team like Clemson, but, kind of is what it is here, I guess. My number's 2.5 here. So, I mean, if anything, I lean the North Carolina side. I agree with you. I think it's over or nothing on the total because I do think North Carolina moves it. I think this is the kind of game that, North Carolina wants to be in. It's why they got high-profile coordinators like they did. It's why they got sort of more of a figurehead, rah-rah presence type of guy in Mac Brown. I'm not going to be the least bit surprised if North Carolina wins this game. On the other hand, I've undervalued and underappreciated Notre Dame so many times over this season already. Liked Clemson against them, really liked Pitt against them, kind of lean Boston College against them, and they took care of their affairs in all of those games. So I'm not going to play this game. And the thing of it is, I don't know if any outcome surprises me here. I think this is kind of a high variance game to a degree.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said there. So don't you think that North Carolina money line is a pretty good play here? I mean, if you like a high variance game, you think North Carolina really has a chance to win. I think money line could be a good bet, especially if you get, up to 5 or something like that. You're going to get a pretty decent price here on a money line. Notre Dame's strength of schedule is a little bit weaker than I expected, because if you go back and look, Louisville was supposed to be good.
Yep.
They're not good. That 12-7 win over them looks pretty bad, honestly. And then Florida State's not good. So, a lot of these teams that Notre Dame has played, and Duke, Duke is not good either. Duke, turns it over constantly. So a lot of these teams that Notre Dame has played are not as good as we thought they would be. North Carolina, I think North Carolina money line could be a good play here. So if you want to take a chance, which I think I might, I think I'm talking myself into this. Sometimes as we talk about these games, I kind of think about it a little bit more, and I think I'll at least bet myself North Carolina money line here for a little bit. This game's on Friday, isn't it?
Yeah, Friday afternoon. So
there we
go.
Really so recovering. One. Yeah, recovering from the Thanksgiving large meal. So instead of a Black Friday shopping, I'll be watching this one probably.
There you go. And again, I mean, look, I understand North Carolina lost to Virginia, a team I'm looking for a lot of regression from. I know they lost to Florida State. They basically played 2 bad halves this year, and they both cost them. So, I don't think we've seen the ceiling for this North Carolina team yet. Maybe we end up seeing it here in this game. How about game 139-140 here? Oregon and Oregon State. They used to call it the Civil War. It's not PC anymore, so they don't call it that. They don't have a name for it, actually. Oregon's 13.5-point favorite, total 64 here in this one. Again, as we're recording on Monday afternoon. And I know you've already got one position in this game, and we're kind of thinking about maybe making another one.
Yeah, I like Oregon and Oregon State over the total. I got a better number than what's available now, and when this airs, it probably will even be higher. So I like Oregon and Oregon State over, and I'll say my cutoff point would be 65 here. I wouldn't bet it over 65. So as you're listening to this, pay attention to what the number is, because I got 61.5 on the over. So this is one where Oregon, to me, Oregon is a team that's much different than last year, and it's my bad for not realizing that they would be a lot better on offense and more chunk plays. You lose as good a quarterback as they just lost, and you kind of think, well, maybe the offense won't be as good. But Moorhead is such a good offensive coordinator that this offense looks really good. They're getting a lot of explosive plays. Oregon is 6th in the nation in yards per play so far this year. They're running the ball really well, 5.7 yards per carry. I don't think Oregon State can stop them. Oregon State's giving up 5.21 yards per carry so far this season. And Oregon State hasn't exactly played offenses that are great at running the football. So I think Oregon's going to score a lot of points in this game. I think Oregon team total over would be a good bet here. At the same time, I kind of like Oregon State team total over too, because I think Oregon's defense has been a real big disappointment. They're 5.17 yards per carry allowed so far this year. They're 100th in the nation in yards per play allowed. This should not be this bad. I don't know why Oregon's defense is this bad. Oregon State is a good running team. Jefferson, a good running back. They don't have a good quarterback. I do think, though, that Oregon State can break some of those big gain run plays like they did the other day against Cal. So I think that both teams get a lot of big gainers in this one. As far as where this line will go, I guess, this is sitting 13.5 with extra juice as we're talking right now. I think it's pretty likely that this one will touch 14 at some point, don't you?
Yeah, I think so. And in fact, globally, there are a couple of 14s out there. And
Okay.
I wonder how long 14 will last. I think that's kind of an interesting talking point in and of itself. Two things. One, in watching Oregon, I can tell you that they look like they're going to be a much better second half team this year. They have made some very nice adjustments. Moorhead in particular has made some good adjustments offensively. They played a very bad first half against Washington State, played a very good second half against Washington State. That's the one that kind of stands out in my mind. The second thing is, in watching that Washington State game, I thought Oregon was really bad fundamentally. Their tackling angles, their pursuit angles were just all bad. I mean, they've got guys that can make plays back there. They've got some highly touted recruits, stuff like that, but they're either not coached up well or something else. But they took a lot of bad angles at Washington State players in that game. And, you take bad angles, and maybe it's a reps thing because the Pac-12 started so late, but you take bad angles and all of a sudden it's an extra 5 or 6 yards, something like that. And we know the game's tailored to offense. We know Oregon's given up a lot of yards per play, stuff like that. Unless they shore those things up here, I think Oregon State can move the football. So, like you said, you got a little bit better of a number. 65 is your cutoff. I think maybe, a first half over, something like that, before Oregon is able to adjust, or even a second half over because Oregon has adjusted so nicely offensively. I think there are some derivative markets to play here if you don't like the pre-flop action.
Yeah, if this one's low scoring early, I like a live over quite a bit because I do think they'll end up scoring a decent amount of points in this game. Oregon secondary, specifically, if you look at their DBs, I don't know anybody who would have put them anywhere other than the top 6 or 8 in the country in secondary before the season. And they haven't been very good. And against the run, they've been terrible. So I think Oregon's been a really big disappointment defensively. We'll have to keep track of this and see if they do improve or not. But at this point, I think Oregon's going to score a lot of points in this game. And when they get ahead, if we assume they're going to be ahead, I think Oregon State will have a chance to score back too. Oregon State playing really quick this year too, 29th in tempo.
Yeah, definitely like that. I know you pick on those tempo changes a lot because those are things that the market is a little bit slow to react to. Kudos to you for getting out in front of the line move here. And again, like we talked about, whether this wins or loses, you got the best of the number that you possibly could, and you're going to have some closing line values. So hopefully that winds up working out for you. We'll jump way down the board here. Going to talk about a couple of rivalry games, and I guess we should have prefaced this before we talked about Oregon State. But in terms of rivalry games, I mean, does the fact that it's a rivalry game change your handicap at all?
Well, I think this year is a little bit different, right? I mean, these rivalry games are not being played all on the same week like they have been. And I mean, the schedule's been so messed up. A lot of these teams haven't played very many games and all at once they're playing their rival. So it's hard to say what it means now. I don't want to make it too much different. I think in general, rivalry games, I would tend to want to bet the under more than the over. I know I just said I like the over in Oregon and Oregon State. I don't think, when I say something like I tend to lean toward the under more, that doesn't mean I won't bet an over. It just means that, everything else being equal, I think the under is probably more valuable. I know a lot of people think underdogs are more valuable in that spot, but I think that's such a big narrative now. I don't even know if that's the case anymore. So this year, I don't think rivalry games I would bet much different than another game.
I hate that. Oh, you can throw the records out. You can throw the numbers out. No, you can't. I mean, one team is just tell me you can throw the record out when Oklahoma's won 16 of 18 against Oklahoma State and they just punked them again last week. Like, no, you can't throw that stuff out because one team may just match up better against the other team, or one coach may just know how to beat the other team. And I know that we've had some high variance in the Iron Bowl here. Auburn and Alabama. 24 is the number across the U.S. markets. A lot of 24s in the global markets as well. Total of 61 on this game as we're recording on Monday. Look, you can go ahead and throw the records out. You can throw out whatever you want for this game. The only way I could go is Alabama, because if Bo Nix turns it over, it will be an Alabama touchdown. And they probably will get some extra possessions in this game. Mac Jones, very, very much in the Heisman candidacy race now, especially off of Justin Fields' game last week. He was in it anyway, but he could very well be the favorite now, unless you think it's Kyle Trask. Look, Alabama just They beat Kentucky by 60 like it was nothing last week. And I know Auburn's a better team, but Alabama's going to win the turnover battle. I'm not taking Auburn. That's for damn sure.
I definitely couldn't take Auburn in this game. It would be Bama or pass for me. Now, I do think that there are a couple ways I'd rather bet this game than taking Bama.
And real quickly, my apologies to our good friend Rich Lamons, who's going to be upset to hear that we cannot touch Auburn here.
Yeah, sorry, Rich. Sorry about that. But I to be honest with you, I'm pretty sure he doesn't blame us here. I think he might be taking Bama. So it might be a spot where, sometimes even if it is your team, that, they don't match up very well. I think that Auburn's offense is a question mark. Now, I think Bama, when they get ahead, Auburn's liable to score some points here because, they're liable to be in spots where Auburn offensively could get some big gainers. They're not very consistent, but, Bo Nix is a feast or famine type guy, I think. He's going to give up some pick sixes. He's going to get some big gainers. On the other side, I don't see how Auburn's stopping Alabama at all. My two favorite ways to play this game would be Bama team total over or just the game over. I should have taken over 59 when this one opened. I thought about it a little bit too long. And a lot of times when, I sit there and think about it, then the line moves in the way that I would have assumed. However, as we've said, I'm a bit cautious about firing on a ton of these right now because of COVID and not knowing what will happen. Some games might get canceled. Some guys might not get to play. But I think it's hard to see Alabama not putting up a big number here. I know Auburn's given them some trouble in some of these games in the past. Bama's offense is a machine this year. They're so good. And Auburn's defense, while it's not bad, they're 46th in the country in yards per play allowed. Look, we know Auburn's defense has been a lot better than this the last few years. So this ain't the same Auburn team that's done a good job defensively on Bama in some of the other years. And then obviously they've had some shootouts lately too. So I think a shootout is more likely in this one, but I think that Bama wins by a pretty big margin here. So the only side I could take would be Bama. I like the over a little bit better.
Last one I want to touch on here, because I've got an overlay, and the line, at least as of Monday, was moving against my number for the Egg Bowl between Mississippi State and Ole Miss. Down to 9.5. My number is 16 on this game, so I'm quite a bit higher than Mark. It was 10.5 early on in the betting process. A little bit of Mississippi State money coming in. The thing about it for me is this, and as I've talked about already, it's an offensively tuned game now. I've got a Mississippi team averaging over 7 yards per play against a Mississippi State offense averaging 4.7 yards per play. And I understand that Mississippi State's defense is quite a bit better than Ole Miss's. Ole Miss has given up over 7 yards per play defensively themselves. But to me, with all the things going on with the Mississippi State program, with everything going on with the Ole Miss program, it seems like the players thoroughly enjoy playing for Lane Kiffin. He's active on social media. He's joking around. He's dicking around. They're a flawed team. I get it. But I also think there's nothing Lane Kiffin would love more than to shove one up Mike Leach's ass in the first Egg Bowl. Because Mike Leach is a guy that comes off pretty abrasive overall for a lot of people, I think. Maybe I'm undervaluing Mississippi State. Maybe they're better than I think. But I'll go down with the ship here. I'm taking Ole Miss in the Egg Bowl.
That's certainly my lean in this game at this number. Like I said, I'm trying not to play very many sides, so I don't know if I'm going to take this one. I think the over would have been the side I would take as far as a total, or it would have been the total I would take. In this game, we have clashing styles to some degree. I mean, you think of Mike Leach and you think that they'd play really fast. They're 82nd in tempo. I think he realizes that offense really isn't that good. Mississippi, though, is going to score points in this game. They're third in tempo in the country, behind only UCF and North Texas. So I think Mississippi's going to score quite a few points here. Mississippi State, I think the question mark here is, and it looks to me like people have really upgraded Mississippi State based on their game last weekend. 31-24 loss to Georgia. I watched some of that game. I had the under 45.5, one of my losers. 3-0 at the end of the first. Sitting there playing a board game with my family and kind of watching the second quarter. And I'm just tossing the pieces around, getting pissed off as they score 31 points in the second quarter and finally just turn off the game. The rest of the game wasn't really that high scoring, but Will Rogers threw for 336 yards against Georgia. I don't know if Georgia's defense isn't as good as we thought, or if they weren't that motivated, because it looks like Georgia is not going to be able to achieve what they wanted to achieve this year. I don't know, maybe Georgia will be a bit of an over team going forward based on JT Daniels being a better quarterback and their defense not looking as good. But the question is Mississippi State actually better on offense than they had been? Or was that just a fluke that they actually moved the ball pretty well? However, I do have to point out they threw for 336 yards on 52 pass attempts, so that's not terribly efficient either. So I tend to agree with you that Mississippi would be the side I would take here. Mississippi team total over too. I know that I'm saying several team totals here. Those are usually not available till like Saturday morning, so I try not to say too much about those, but I think it is a good way to bet some of these games. So I think Mississippi scores their points here.
I agree. And again, I mean, this is the point I'd love to drive home, and it's hard because you have clients, but there are a lot of other ways to play, and you can get things like the team totals in your free picks newsletter, which you'll promote at the end of the show. But that's the thing, man. I mean, there are so many ways to bet these games now, derivatives and props and all those kinds of things, that you don't have to try and beat these really hard pre-flop markets if you don't want to. And again, it's tough for you with clients and the way that sites grade selections and stuff like that. But I mean, yeah, there are a lot of different ways to play these things, and maybe team totals and first and second halves and quarters and stuff like that may just be the way to do it going forward.
Yeah, I think team totals are a really good way to do it. I haven't really delved into the quarters, but I know some people are good at that. I think first and second half plays make a lot of sense. And live betting, we've talked about, I think it is a really good way to play things. And there's going to be more people live betting in the future, certainly. The problem with me taking team totals or other derivative bets is a lot of those aren't available till close before the game. And a lot of sites have rules that you can't post it after a certain time. Also, some people don't even have a book that has those. So I don't want to release something like that. Like you said, you can get those in my free pick newsletter, and those have done really well. The teasers, team totals, first half plays, things like that.
All right, so let's transition over to the college basketball side of things here, and we'll try not to run too long. I know you and I are, we got very busy weeks here to say the least, but I do want to recap something that we mentioned at the tail end of last week's show, and those are the resources, things that we use to find our information. So I want to make sure that people hear us talk about those so that, as they're prepping for whatever semblance of a college basketball season we get, they'll know where we look.
Yeah, as far as previews, if you look going into the season, the Blue Ribbon book is a really good one. It's 400 pages or so, full of a lot of information. It talks a lot about things like team chemistry, new players, what kind of style they might play, which that's really the main thing I look for there. I'm not looking for how many points a guy scored in high school. I'm looking for what kind of style of play does the coach want to play, especially because I'm usually betting totals. I will say that I think the three-man weave previews are really good. I think they're even better than normal. They've really upped their game quite a bit. So props to those guys, really good previews. They do a really good job breaking down specific sets that are run. They dribble handoff, which is another site, funny because that's a type of play and another site. Dribble handoff is a good site to look at. I've been looking at it quite a bit for efficiency numbers. They try to look at how good of a shot did a team put up compared to what their effective field goal percentage was. I think that's something really interesting to look forward to here throughout the course of the season. And that'll be something I'll try to incorporate more into my handicapping. But three-man weave does a good job of breaking down, pick and roll, who runs the pick and roll a lot, who does the motion offense, who's going to full court press and how they've done with it. Really good resource. And I think things like that, where if you do Blue Ribbon and three-man weave, they kind of complement each other. So I think those are really good. As far as additional sources, KenPom's still really good. You and I talked about this last week, and we've also talked off the air. The problem with KenPom is it was better a few years ago when not everybody was looking at it. Now that everybody's looking at it, you could make a really good argument, and I think it's probably true, that a site like Bart Torvik's site or Haslametrics is a better site to be looking at right now, because those are ones that not everybody's looking at now. And some of them have some stats that KenPom doesn't have. He has some that they don't have as well, but I think some of those other stats can be really helpful. So there's the good news for everybody listening is there are plenty of sites to get a lot of data. Sometimes there can be almost information overload. So I would caution you to point out what you think are the most important numbers to look at. And I know that's something we can talk about here, but some of those numbers, if you try to incorporate everything too heavily, you can feel a little bit overwhelmed. But the good news is there are plenty of sites out there that are very helpful.
Yeah, and something I think is important to mention here is that, these sites, for the most part, cover every team in the country. And there are a lot of teams in Division I college basketball. I believe it's 353. Is it still 353?
I think it might be a little bit more, but I
355.
Don't
maybe?
quote me.
Well, I guess I can go ahead and take a look at that as I'm talking here. But one of the things that you and I talked about, and it was almost in a roundabout way, sort of addressing, well, who's actually going to play, and which conferences to focus in on. If you are trying to handicap the entire country, I'm seeing 347 on Bart Torvik, including
it's
Dixie
He took
State.
out the Ivy League, so it's 357. And then,
Okay. Dixie State added this year. That's an interesting one. Tarleton State added, I believe, this year as well. So, look, the fact of the matter is there are a hell of a lot of teams, and most of them schools that you've probably never even heard of. So, specialization, a great idea, especially this year when we don't really know which conferences are going to play and all of that. Try to become an expert on 2 or 3 conferences. Know them inside and out. Know those teams for whenever we get to conference play. That gives you an advantage. If you are trying to handicap 353 teams, you will fail because it's very hard to do. It takes up so much of your time. And that's why something like KenPom, if you think you have an edge on the market because you subscribe to KenPom, you don't. Every sportsbook in the world subscribes to KenPom. They have a subscription. They know what KenPom's number is on that game. They know which way the betting markets are going to go because of what KenPom says. So become an expert in smaller conferences, or even if you want to do a big conference, just know those teams intimately inside and out. That's probably the best way for you to have success in college basketball. That and listening to us, because we always look at the under the radar teams, looking at recent trends, coaching changes, all those types of things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, KenPom was a nice edge, maybe 8 years ago or something like that, 10 years ago. Now it's not. And I think that's important that we point out some of the things that KenPom either doesn't incorporate or could be, something that he overrates a bit. I mean, look, KenPom's a great site. It's just no one site would be perfect at predicting how a game's going to go. So having more sites and ones that not everybody's looking at is really important. I will say that one thing that has really happened, and I don't think we've talked about this on the show much, so I want to point this out. One thing that's happened in the NBA first and is now happening in college basketball more is the mid-range game is kind of going away to some degree. Teams either want to get to the basket or they want to shoot threes. And I think it makes sense because a lot of times those mid-range shots are not very easy shots and they're still worth 2 points. So why wouldn't you want to get to the rim where you're either likely to make a shot more often or get fouled, or shoot a three when it's worth more points? So that's something I want to keep an eye on here as we go forward this year too, is a place like Haslametrics, which will look at how many mid-range attempts does a team have versus the normal team. I don't think you really want to be betting on teams that are shooting a ton of mid-range jumpers, because I think the analytics of shooting threes or getting to the hoop are correct.
No, that's an excellent point. Again, your return on investment shooting that mid-range game is not very high. So that is a really excellent point there. And sort of along that same breath, I mean, what are some of the stats that, you really key in on when you're handicapping matchups?
I think that rebounding is more important than anybody else thinks it is. I know we've talked about this in the past. Teams that are good offensive rebounding teams have been really good ATS. You get second chances. 2 things happen when you get an offensive rebound. A lot of times you get fouled. That's a putback. Even if you miss that second chance, I mean, the fact that you had another chance that close to the basket, or even if you kick it out, you get a second chance, you're going to score a lot more points. Offensive rebounding teams have been really good, and clearly they can't be really bad at defensive rebounding because that's really important too. So teams with rebounding advantages is really important. Tempo is something that is the first thing I look at, obviously. Being a totals guy, tempo is really important to me. I also think that style of play is really important, which that's one that you get more often from watching the game. I know some people don't like to watch any games because it's kind of easier emotionally to not watch anything. I do feel like college basketball especially watching games can give me an edge. I see which coaches will foul late in the game, which coaches won't, which coaches are going to press in a certain situation, which coaches won't. If you know what the line is before the game and somebody's favored by 10 points and the team that's an underdog has a coach that will foul to the death, you probably want the over in a game like that if you think they're going to be behind by 9 or 10 points at the end of the game. So I think something like that's really important. Another one is effective field goal percentage offense, because that is something that incorporates a lot of the other things into one. So I would look at tempo, if you're a totals person especially. I'd look at rebounding a lot for ATS bets and totals, obviously. I think free throw percentage is still really important too, because there's a lot of free throws in college basketball. And look, there are some big differences in how teams shoot free throws. You can have a team shoot almost 80% from the line, and then you can also have teams in the SWAC and places like that. They 55% from the line or something like that. And I think everybody has been there. Nothing worse than, being on a team -3 and they're up by 2 and they have 2 free throws with the second left and they brick both of them. That's really discouraging. So I think free throw percentage is still really important as well.
Yeah, I think so too. And one of the nice things about a lot of these sites is, you can see what the rate of 3-point attempts is relative to field goal attempts overall. You can see how often they're getting to the free throw line, by percentage of their possessions and stuff like that. All of these things are very important because, unlike college football where scoring is primarily done in 3s and 7s, it's ones, 2s, and 3s here. So a lot more numbers of importance, stuff like that. So, we'll talk more about that as we kind of go forward, key numbers and, some of those things in college basketball. And again, recording this a little bit early, hoping that we get a good number of games on Wednesday on opening day. Real quickly here, we'll run through some coaching changes and we will key in more on these as we go forward. But I know you wrote up these notes. I want to make sure we get to them on today's show. And you look at coaching changes for a variety of different reasons, seeing if, maybe a coach comes in that could maximize the talent, seeing if maybe a coach comes in who's upgrading from a weaker conference to a better conference where maybe they won't experience as much success, stuff like that. But also, as you said, you're a totals guy. So a lot of times you're looking for coaching philosophies and how teams may do from a tempo standpoint.
Absolutely. And I will just say, to be transparent here, what I'm going to do at the beginning of the season is try to key in on some of these under the radar games that somebody else is probably not paying attention to, because it's going to be hard to look at every single game and fully handicap every single game with everything else that's going on with the football slate still being really big. This time of the year around Thanksgiving, usually football's kind of slowing down a little bit. For the first couple of weeks of college basketball, there's still going to be a lot of football going on. That's for sure. So I think specialization is going to be really, really important here at the beginning of college basketball. So key in on whether it be a conference or whether it be coaching changes, different philosophy. I think it's a really, really good idea. Wisconsin, Green Bay, the first one I'm going to talk about. I want to start under the radar because, look, if you've listened to us before, you know that I love talking under the radar. Both of us love talking in those under the radar games in college basketball. It's because there's more money to be made there. There's no doubt about that. Everybody can know who Kentucky and Duke is going to be. Not everybody's going to know who Wisconsin, Green Bay, or UC Irvine or somebody like that's going to be. Link Darner was their coach in the past. I think everybody was a little surprised that he was let go. But then they go to Will Ryan, Bo Ryan's son. Bo Ryan's teams always played really slow. I know that Will Ryan's teams in Division II actually played kind of an average pace. So I don't think that they will play as slow as Bo Ryan's teams did, but they're going to be a lot more methodical than Darner's teams were, because they were always top 10 in tempo. So Wisconsin, Green Bay, I assume that they will put out numbers that are quite a bit lower on totals here for Wisconsin, Green Bay at the beginning of the year, but I would still lean to the under. Green Bay will probably be pretty good on offense though, because I think Ryan's teams are actually pretty efficient offensively. So maybe they're a good bet on team as well. Another one I was going to say, Wake Forest, Danny Manning to Steve Forbes. We've talked about Forbes a lot in the past. Forbes is a really big upgrade in prep and in-game coaching from Danny Manning. The question is, how can he recruit? I think Wake Forest is going to play a little bit slower this year and be better on defense. And I also think that Wake Forest, if people are too low on them, could be a good bet on team this year, because if you look at Wake Forest last year, they were really disappointing in a lot of games. They got blown out in games that they shouldn't get blown out in. They're not really talented team, but they're also not so bad that they should play as poorly as they did last year. Manning didn't do a good job coaching those guys up. I think Forbes will. He's proven that in the past. I don't see why it would change any. So, from a major team, I think that's a good one. UIC, the next one. Steve McLean to Luke Yaklich. Yaklich turned the Michigan defense from 68th to 3rd and 2nd in defensive efficiency. He was hired as a coach just to coach defense. After he left Illinois State, too, their defense fell off badly. This guy is really good coach defensively. UIC, a team that I will look to bet unders with, or maybe bet on. I'm not sure what kind of numbers we'll get with them, but I think Yaklich is a very good coach there. I don't think he has a lot of talent, but I think they'll play defense much better than they have in the past. So that's one that I'll look to isolate here. A couple more. Air Force. Jeff Scott, their new coach. Dave Filipovich was there before. Filipovich had sped up Air Force a bit. They were not good at all on defense. They were playing pretty high-scoring games. They still ran kind of a Princeton offense, but they were playing at an average pace or a bit faster. You remember Jeff Scott was the old coach at Denver. Denver, very, very slow pace, very, very slow. So expect Air Force games to be much slower paced than they've been in the past. And if there's value here on totals, I will look to bet unders here with Air Force this season. Last one I had here, UNC Wilmington, CB McGrath to Kaio Siddle. Good hire here for UNC Wilmington. Siddle was a top assistant for Kevin Keats a few years ago when they were very good. I know they want to pressure a lot and play a very fast pace. Wilmington actually played pretty fast last year, but they were just so bad at everything. It's hard to know what to do with because they were so inefficient on offense. I think Wilmington will be a bet on team at some point this season. I don't know if it'll be game one or not, but I think that Siddle is an upgrade there as a coach.
Well, and those are excellent things to take a look at. Definitely want to look for tempo changes, want to look for teams that are going to play a little bit different of a style. And Wisconsin, Green Bay, and Air Force, 2 teams last year that were not very good in terms of adjusted defensive efficiency. If they've got more of a focus on that, if they slow down a little bit, as is the expectation, that's where you find value because their defenses are thought to be really poor. But if they're working on defense and they're playing games with fewer possessions, that should help their defense out a little bit. So those types of things, that's the kind of analysis you can expect here with myself and Kyle Hunter on these editions of ATS Radio when we talk college basketball. And Kyle, what can people expect over at your huntersportspicks.com website?
Well, obviously with college basketball about to tip off, and like you said, hopefully we have a season that's not too strange. It'll definitely be different, and hopefully we get a decent amount of games. But my college basketball passes are up now. I'm going to be sending out an email newsletter later tonight, I believe, regarding specials for this season. You can sign up for my free picks newsletter there at huntersportspicks.com, where I'll give special promos via the newsletter. I'll also send a free play every single weekend, usually 2 free plays. And this will continue throughout the basketball season. I'll be giving you some free plays for basketball. So you have that to look forward to as well. So if you haven't signed up for that already at huntersportspicks.com, I encourage you to do so. And like I said, college basketball passes up there, and NBA is not too far in the distance either. So plenty of long-term passes if you're interested in joining on.
Well, and definitely one thing we're going to do, we're going to see how this college basketball thing goes over, the first 6 days of the season. And, we may split college basketball and college football 50-50 or something like that as we go forward. We'll kind of get a feel for what's happening in college basketball because it seems like college football kind of has things sort of down to the point where we're maybe only losing 15 or so games a week. College basketball, who knows? So we'll see what happens with the format of the show as we go forward, but great college basketball and college football insights today from Kyle Hunter of huntersportspicks.com. And Kyle, happy Thanksgiving to you and yours, bud. Really appreciate your flexibility here this week, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Yeah, happy Thanksgiving to you and yours as well, and happy Thanksgiving to all the listeners. Thanks for listening, and as always, had a lot of fun, man. Thanks.
There you go. Once again, there's professional bettor and handicapper Kyle Hunter from huntersportspicks.com. Coming up on our Thursday edition of ATS Radio, I'll chat with Brad Powers from bradpowersports.com about college football and the NFL. And then Friday, my Circus Sports Millions segment, taking a look at my picks in the contest for Week 12. That'll do it for me. Thank you so much for listening, everybody, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.